Hare Krishna. Question: why do you call your site the spiritual scientist when you don't have much scientific content in it? Most of the content is devotional. Aren't you mm, misappropriating the prestige of science to promote your own philosophy? Answer: not exactly. The word science does not have any one precise definition, even within mainstream science. If we look at the various definitions of science that have been adopted at various times, there have been huge amount of debate. Some of the greatest scientists, say for example Newton, at that time what he was doing was natural philosophy. The word scientist was not there, science and scientists were not there at all. So there was a method of study of nature, and that was called natural philosophy at that time. So in the 18th century roughly, towards the end, and the 19th century, the word science was became mainstream to use for this particular purpose of studying natural phenomena and trying to find natural explanations for natural phenomena. But that is not the only way in which the word science is used even today, what to speak of in the past. In general, the word science refers to any body of systematic knowledge. So systematic study of any subject can also be called as science. So when now if our goal was just to misappropriate the prestige of science, then we could just have called it the scientist, making it very clear that spiritual scientist. Now yes, there is, according to a narrow definition of science, there is no such thing as spiritual science, because science is meant to study only material things. So then in that case, if we are using the word spiritual scientist, then it becomes very clear that what we are talking about is not the narrow definition of science, where science is simply used to talk about material phenomena, to study material phenomena and find material or natural explanation for material phenomena. So that is not that is not the meaning of science which we are using. It's very clear from the title itself. So it's a spiritual scientist. That's the first point. Now, as far as misappropriation of the word science is concerned, as I said, science does not have one meaning, and that's why there's no question of misappropriation. But secondly, and more importantly, actually, science does have tremendous prestige in today's society, and as theists, it would be intellectually irresponsible on our part if we allow atheists to misappropriate the prestige of science. Now, either we define science as investigation of as the quest for natural explanation of natural phenomena. If we define it like that, then science has nothing to do with God, because God is supernatural in the sense that God exists at a transcendental level. So then there is no way that science can be used to disprove God either. But there are many atheists and many who aggressively claim from science the inference that God doesn't exist. And they today in the mainstream culture, because of the influence of this, that means there is equation of science with materialism, and then subsequently there is equation of science with atheism. So now this is a misrepresentation of science. So if in science there is nothing in any of the theories of science which in and of itself comprises a disproof of God. There's no way science doesn't talk about God. So if we are going to stick to the narrow definition of science as natural explanation for natural phenomena, so then whether there is anything which exists beyond nature or not, that is not a scientific question, that is a philosophical question. Because so to understand this clearly, science, it's like if I use spectacles to look at some things, then whether there is something which gives out fragrance, and whether their fragrance exists or not, whether the object that gives fragrance exists or not, that is just out of the scope of my study, as long as I'm going to perceive only with my eyes in the spectacles. So then one should not make statements whether something fragrant exists or doesn't exist. So if we are going to stick to the narrow definition of science, then atheists should not be allowed to use the word science to propagate their philosophy also. So as long as atheists are going to use science and are going to try to prove that because of science we are atheists, then that means science is being used in what is essentially a time-honored, you could say, I'd say ancient battle between two worldviews, between the materialistic worldview, a materialistic atheistic worldview, and a spiritual theistic worldview. So then science will be used by both for their purpose. Now it's not that science is interestingly atheistic or interestingly theistic. Science as a tool, then everybody, if the atheists have a right to use science to prove their philosophy, their atheistic philosophy, their belief system. Atheism is also a belief system. The belief system in the unprovable claim that God doesn't exist. So then theists also have a right to use science to establish, to prove their beliefs. So therefore, science, it's not misappropriation, it is utilization which is being done by everyone. And as far as the relative amount of content that is there, yes, there is. It's not that the scientific content is insignificant. There's at least 10% of content is scientific in the reduced sense of the definition of the word science. But beyond that, there is a modern science, there is Vedic science also over here. If you see two categories on the main menu, there is. And as far as the overall Krishna conscious, devotional, theistic, Vedic content is concerned, the spiritual scientist does have much more scientific content than most other sites which are presenting this wisdom. So whether we talk about ISKCON sites or non-ISKCON sites, there are very few which present the scientific basis of many of the Vedic teachings. And so this presents it in much more detail than most such sites. So in that sense, the claim to science is not unwarranted. And beyond that, so my goal is, there are devotee scientists who present papers to other scientists. They write books for other scientists. And Srila Prabhupada, when he founded the Bhaktivedanta Institute, it was a body of scientists to do scientific outreach. So under his guidance, they actually made 4 statements or 4 target audiences. So one was scientists, so that they will present papers and do research and get published in journals. That was one outreach audience. The second outreach audience was the students. The students are going to become the future thinkers, and they should be reached out. That is going to universities and giving lectures, or in other ways reaching out to students. Third is the general public, so writing books to present the wisdom of Krishna consciousness in a scientific way to the general people. And the fourth would be to devotees themselves. So that means that devotees who want to see how the path that they have chosen is scientifically intelligible, is scientifically defensible, they should be trained. Those who want this understanding and those who want the training to do that, to share similarly with others, they should be provided in help also. So now, yes, spiritual scientist is not working at the first level where devotee scientists are working, that to present the scientific principles of Krishna consciousness or the scientific side of Krishna consciousness to other scientists, but it is working in a small way, very small, insignificant way, to fulfill the other 3 purposes. We present to the general people, present to the students, many students, and ask questions, and the format is somewhat educational with questions and answers. And of course, there are many devotees who also ask questions, and the site provides answers for them also. So in that sense, the scientific purpose is being served, but the site has also evolved in its own way. So if you see the other topics also, the presentation is logical, systematic, and in that sense, it is that being logical and systematic is one characteristic of science. So the other question answer content also is scientific in the broad sense of the word. So the name the spiritual scientist actually was coined by Devamrut Prabhu, who is now Bhaktirasamrit Maharaj. He had started a magazine called The Spiritual Scientist, which is a hard copy magazine, and then he ran it for a few years, and then when he diversified, or he migrated from college preaching to other services, then he gave that legacy to Radheshyam Prabhu. Radheshyam Prabhu ran it for a few years. Radheshyam Prabhu is the temple president of Pune, and then he handed it over to me. So initially it was just a magazine which is hard copy. Then I made it into soft copy magazine, which I was running for 5-6 years. Then we put after 1 or 2 years of running it, then we put it not just as a magazine which would go by email to people, but also as a site where all the articles would be available. And then after doing that for 5-6 years, then in 2011 I also added other features, which is especially question answers and lectures. And now this site has become a broad forum for sharing the wisdom of Krishna consciousness, in which science is one need. Science is one aspect of it. Science, as in the restricted sense of the term, as natural explanation for natural phenomena. But in a broad sense, in the systematic, logical, rational presentation of spiritual principles. So it has evolved as per the needs of the audience it is serving. So we see that this happens with many forums. A forum may start off as meant for a particular audience, but as it serves other audiences, then it diversifies and includes many other features also. So that is how the spiritual scientist is presenting spiritual wisdom in a scientific way. So it is not claiming to be a scientific site per se, it is a spiritual site in the sense of sharing spiritual wisdom, but in the method of the logical, systematic, rational presentation that is characteristic of science. Thank you. Hare Krishna.